folk music is really the personification of a human being extending his hand to another human being without losing any of his dignity. We feel this way about it. Walk with us.
Early American folk music's true lifeblood came from singers and instrumentalists playing for their own satisfaction. It thrived in the backwoods of Appalachia, among the cowboys settling the West, with the immigrants in the cities, and amidst the descendants of African slaves in the Deep South. The 1930s found John and Alan Lomax canvassing the country, recording the first known collection of American folk music for the Library of Congress. During their travels, they discovered the quintessential folk singer, Leadbelly. Woody Guthrie quickly followed with his realistic depictions of American life. Guthrie soon joined with Pete Seeger, Sis Cunningham, and Lee Hayes to form the Almanac Singers, a group of ragtag artists who began to inject political activism into the folk movement, as they wrote songs that were mostly pro-union and anti-war, and often sung at communist rallies. But with patriotic fervor sweeping the country during World War II, the Almanac Singers' message fell on deaf ears. When the war ended, Seeger and Hayes, along with two new members, Fred Hellerman and Ronnie Gilbert, joined together to create the Weavers. They shot to the top of the charts with a recreation of Leadbelly's hit, Goodnight Irene. But as quickly as success found the Weavers, the country's Red Scare and infamous blacklist halted any chance of popular acceptance. The fledgling folk revival came to a screeching halt. It took the Kingston Trio to truly make folk music a fad. In 1958, Tom Dooley popularized and introduced folk music to millions of people, including a generation of collegiate youth just beginning to question the value of conformity and post-war prosperity. Rather than embracing their parents' cookie-cutter existence, this new generation wanted more from life, and they were publicly directed to question it.
That the torch has been passed to a new generation of Americans. Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.
This generation wanted to make a change, and music provided the perfect vehicle. Perhaps even more importantly than exposing folk music to the masses, Tom Dooley changed the music industry's views of these unconventional artists.
Every record company had to have some folk group or folk singing type person. Therefore, it made it commercially viable for Columbia to take a chance on Bob Dylan and Joan Baez.
These became the faces of a movement representing a generation who knew that changes had to be made across the board, starting with the inequalities at home. The best way these folkies knew how to create change was through their music.
We thought that segregation wasn't going to last and that we were going to have something to do with ending it. We really believed we were going to have a part as songwriters in changing the world.
But it wasn't enough to just sing songs of our past. Instead, newly written topical songs, speaking to our present, became the driving force. The introduction of Broadside, a grassroots publication, provided an outlet for hundreds of artists to express their concerns. At the same time that folk music was gaining popularity throughout the country, civil unrest in the South was gaining national attention. A nonviolent campaign led by Dr. Martin Luther King, relying on sit-ins, boycotts, rallies, and especially song, looked to change the status quo. Freedom songs, drawn from Black religious experience, were embraced and adapted by the civil rights community in much the same way folk songs had been embraced and adapted by Northern college students. We Shall Overcome quickly became the unofficial anthem of the movement after it was introduced by Guy Carawan at the founding meeting of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee in Raleigh, North Carolina. This simple but penetrating spiritual gave voice to the struggle, and from the spring of 1960 on, no civil rights gathering would be complete without it. Over the next few years, folk singers and their followers joined sit-ins, freedom rides, and marches in the North and the South, all in the name of freedom and equality. A union between white and black students would be forged in the battles they waged to register voters, test desegregation laws, and maintain the principles of passive resistance in the face of bombings, beatings, and murders. the glue that held it all together, that gave each rally an air of spirituality, that pushed each marcher onward despite oppressive heat, and that gave individuals hope as they waited in jail, were the freedom songs.
I have a hammer in the morning, a hammer in the evening. Oh, the little Rivers was buried from the bullet he caught.
The bond between newly popularized folk artists and civil rights activists grew in strength, eventually leading to the marriage of their two movements. In July of 1963, folkies from across the country converged upon Newport, Rhode Island for the annual Folk Festival. This three-day event historically brought together folk artists from every genre, but this year would be different. Joan Baez, Peter Paul and Mary, Pete Seeger, and Bob Dylan, along with Odetta, the Freedom Singers and the Staple Singers, gathered on the festival's main stage for a groundbreaking final performance. They enthusiastically belted out a raucous rendition of folk music's newly minted theme song, Blowin' in the Wind, and then linking their arms together to form a human chain. White-black, male-female, young and slightly older, representing the hope of universal harmony, they began to sing. In this moment, everything, the civil rights movement, a deep love for traditional folk music, and a generation's belief that it could make a better world, came together collectively taking a stand. They were neither alone nor afraid, and they were pretty darn sure that someday they would overcome.
Newport, for me, was a powerful experience because it was a coming together of the topical song movement and the folk music revival with the music-rich culture of the civil rights movement.
Exactly 2 months after the historic and triumphant statement of solidarity, many of these same artists joined a crowd of 250,000 in the nation's capital to spread the word. Over objections from event organizers, Harry Belafonte had reasoned that including mainstream white artists would only enhance the message of this historic gathering.
How many seas must a white dove sail before she sleeps in the sand?
The March on Washington was not only a moment of extreme hopefulness, it was a moment of the confirmation of the possibility of that hope becoming a reality. That was the moment of recognition of what people could do to change history.
Looking back, the march was surely an important catalyst for the civil rights movement, bringing together all major national black organizations who put aside their differences in support of a common message, all the while appealing to a diverse audience with white supporters from guitar-toting beatniks to respected clergymen, representing a full 20% of the marchers on a blistering Wednesday afternoon.
Being a loyal American was saying, I believe in this country, and if this country is doing something wrong, I have to stand up for it.
These folk singers and other musicians, they got in the way, in a good sense. They used their talent, they used their music to help make the country better and help move the movement forward.
It would take almost 2 years and many more marches, rallies, and demonstrations before President Johnson would direct Congress to pass the Voting Rights Act of 1965.
Their cause must be our cause too. Because it's not just Negroes, but really it's all of us who must overcome the crippling legacy of bigotry and injustice. And we shall overcome.
The folk artists of the early 60s lent their voices and songs to the civil rights movement to take a stand and create an important change in our country's history.
Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last.
And the ship's wise men will remind you once again that the whole wide world is watching.